Hello, everyone, and welcome to my talk at this year's virtual Toronto Veg Food Fest. My name is Camille Labchuk, and I'm an animal rights lawyer and the executive director of Animal Justice. And what I'm going to talk to you today is about something pretty serious, which is the spread of egg gag laws in Canada. So, this term egg gag laws, the first question is, what does that mean? It refers to agricultural gag laws. So, these are laws that governments and industries are putting in place that try to silence whistleblowers and undercover investigations and prevent the public from seeing the reality of what happens behind the closed doors of factory farms. Sometimes that takes the form of bans on filming cruelty inside farms. Sometimes that means making it very difficult or challenging legally to get a person in position in the first place to do that filming. And there's a variety of other restrictions on our freedom of expression as well that are all to the detriment of animals. So I'm going to talk to you today about egg gag laws, their arrival in Canada, and what we can all do about it. So undercover investigations in Canada started becoming prominent in about 2012 when Mercy for Animals did many investigations into virtually all sectors of the Canadian meat and dairy and egg industry. So they partnered with CTV's W5, which is a premier investigative affairs program, to air many of these undercover investigations. The first one was into a pig farm in Manitoba. There have been investigations into hatcheries, into turkey farms, into dairy farms, into pig transport facilities, into veal farms, slaughterhouses as well. Basically, you name it, and now we now have a glimpse inside the reality of what happens to animals in these operations. Of course, the reason we need undercover investigations in the first place is because it's very difficult for any one of us as individuals to see what happens behind the closed doors of factory farms. Animals are considered private property in this country, and that means that farmers can keep them behind closed doors without any access to the public. There's also no laws that protect them. Despite the fact that we kill millions, hundreds of millions of farmed animals every year, there is no legal regulation of the conditions that they are meant to be kept in. So there's no laws that say, here's how much space they should have, here's how much social interaction they need, here's what kind of interaction with members of their family they should get. There's nothing there to protect their psychological well-being. All that apply are general animal cruelty laws. And farming is exempted in a variety of ways from those laws. So the legal regime is pretty poor. And the inspection regime, of course, is non existent because without any laws to enforce, what would inspectors go on to farms to inspect for? So the public does not have access to information about what happens on farms and the serious abuse that animals endure unless investigations happen. And those investigations have revealed some pretty horrific happenings. There is anything from appalling standard conditions with animals stuffed inside tiny crates and given not enough space to move their wings if they're chickens. There's situations where animals are suffering from overt signs of physical distress and discomfort, such as engorged udders, broken wings, broken legs, prolapses, open wounds, just very, very horrific stuff. Investigations have not only happened in the farming industry, but there's also been investigations in zoos and mink farms and marine land, which keeps whales and dolphins and other animals in captivity, and even a Montreal research lab. So these have become an accepted part of the Canadian landscape and a very important way that we see the truth about what happens to animals. Investigations have also resulted in not just exposure and sensitizing people to the truth about farming and other industries, but they've also resulted in pretty significant legal and policy change. So there have been situations where farm workers and farmers and the corporations that own farms have pled guilty to animal cruelty after undercover investigations. There have been legal changes, such as British Columbia introducing some new regulations pertaining to animal cruelty. And in general, there have been industry moves as well. So once the industry is under pressure because people see how horrific the situation is, that has sometimes prompted them to adopt some animal welfare reforms, even if they're not very meaningful. Initially, when undercover investigations first started coming out in Canada, the agriculture industry, at least in Ontario, said that it wasn't interested in passing egg gag laws. These laws have their origin in the States, where they were originally passed in the 90s, and then again became popular in the 2010s in response to undercover investigations in the States that revealed animal cruelty. But the Ontario industry said that it didn't want egg gag laws. So for a long time, I think many of us here in Canada thought that we were safe from these disturbing, very, very troubling laws. So what changed? Well, I would say it's very fair to think about this as a situation where People are becoming much more sensitized to animal cruelty issues in the food supply as a result of both undercover investigations, as a result of other forms of animal activism. And for example of that, just check out this photo. You all know who Anita Krines is most likely. She's the founder of Toronto Pig Save and the Animal Save movement, which is now a global movement. And animal save advocates stand outside of slaughterhouses to protest the treatment of animals. And they also film inside those slaughter trucks, bringing pigs and other animals to their deaths. They give water when appropriate to provide comfort to thirsty, suffering animals who've been on those trucks for sometimes days at a time. And they film the conditions inside so that they can further publicize that and bring it to the world. The industry doesn't like these activities, obviously, because it sheds light, again, on the horrific, significant suffering that animals endure. So in 2015, it pushed to prosecute Anita for criminal mischief for a simple act of compassion, which is giving water to pigs. As probably most of you know, she was acquitted after a much publicized trial. And again, the industry was not welcoming of the attention that it shone on them. Recently, there have been other trespass incidents on farms by people who are so frustrated with the lack of regulation and lack of oversight. This is Jenny McQueen, local Toronto activist once again. She was charged with break and enter for simply going into a pig farm and rescuing a pig who was in serious, serious distress. This is Malcolm Klimawicz. He trespassed allegedly on some fur farms that were keeping mink in appalling conditions, and he exposed again those conditions to the world through videos that were on YouTube. And the mink industry, of course, was distraught over this because they do not want public scrutiny of the cruelty that he exposed. So the question is, why are we seeing trespass incidents? Why are we seeing activism? Why are we seeing undercover investigations? And the answer to that is very clear. It's because people are so frustrated and fed up with a legal system that doesn't regulate the use of animals on farms, and with governments who turn a blind eye to suffering and don't even bother to inspect farms. People are feeling compelled to take those matters into their own hands. And as Jessica Scott Reed notes in this excellent Globe and Mail op-ed from last year, that so long as the treatment of animals on farms is not regulated, this type of activism is likely to continue. And it's an important issue. Probably if you're watching this talk, you already agree, but for somebody who's not, you could try mentioning them to them that 834 land animals were slaughtered for food last year in Canada. That's not even aquatic animals whose lives are measured in tons. That's just the animals who we kill in slaughterhouses for food. That's a huge number, and unfortunately, it keeps going up. As you can see, it was closer to 750 million in 2015. That number is rising every year, so it's of the utmost importance. And, because of this, we're now seeing other types of activism like farm lockdowns. So, this is a group of activists in British Columbia. They occupied a pig farm where it had previously been exposed for horrible suffering of pigs inside those closed doors. The farm wasn't prosecuted. Some of the activists are being prosecuted, which again is incredibly disturbing because the industry seems to get away with everything. But activism like this, where people occupy a farm, bring media attention, and expose conditions inside through things like Facebook live streams, again, that's attention that the meat industry doesn't want. Uh, so this brings us to the first egg gag law. There was a lockdown in Alberta just about a year ago, just over a year ago, last weekend, Labor Day, where a turkey farm was occupied. And the Alberta government, led by Jason Kenney, a very conservative right-wing government, did not like this. So they introduced Bill 27, which was Canada's first egg gag law. Now, to hear them describe it, it's simply about protecting farmers from trespass, but in reality, it goes far, far, far beyond that. So first of all, it makes it an offense to go onto a premises or inside a facility without permission to be there, and a person who obtains permission by false pretenses is guilty of an offense punishable by up to $25,000 for a person or $200,000 for a corporation. So why does this matter? The false pretenses provision is the heart of the issue here, and that's effectively what forecloses undercover investigations. A person who gets hired by a farm for the purpose of doing an investigation and seeing if there's any animal cruelty typically would not reveal to their employer those intentions when they get the job. They don't want to do so to tip their hand because they wouldn't be hired otherwise, because farms don't want any exposure like this. So that provision is an egg gag provision, and it prevents people from getting jobs for the purpose of exposing cruelty on farms. But it's not just farms. In Alberta, this applies to any premises. So that could be research labs, that could be puppy mills, that could be exotic animal farms, that could be any situation where animals are kept or where humans are kept in vulnerable conditions. So that could be nursing homes with COVID outbreaks. That could be daycares where conditions are maybe not ideal. That could be, schools where somebody might want to see what's truly going on. So it goes far beyond just undercover activism, and it extends to journalism and extends to any facility. So incredibly disturbing. Ontario followed suit after Alberta passed its law in only 10 days back last year in November. Ontario introduced Bill 156, which again is described by the government as about reducing trespass, protecting farm animals, food supply, and farmers from risks by trespassing, such as exposing farm animals to disease and stress and introducing contaminants into the food supply. So they're obviously trying to claim to the public that this is about food safety and protecting animals, but the reality is it's a simple egg gag law. That's the plain truth of it. So Bill 156 makes it an offense to enter into animal protection zones, which is probably the most Orwellian way you could think of to describe what happens on a farm or a slaughterhouse, which this applies to, because nothing kind happens to animals in those circumstances. It makes it an offense to interact with animals on those premises. So that could be if an animal is behind one side of a fence, I'm standing on another on my own property, and I give a carrot to a horse. It means no stopping or interfering with a vehicle transporting farmed animals, including outside slaughterhouses, which affects the safe movement and their activities, where they often interact with the animals by giving them water or filming the conditions that they're kept in. So, and once again, as with Alberta, it makes it so that you can't go onto property, and if you gain consent via false pretenses, that's an offense. The penalties are up to $25,000. That's again quite high. There are sweeping arrest and private prosecution powers granted to farmers and truckers, which is quite unusual, and including the ability to get restitution for alleged violations of biosecurity. And if they privately prosecute a person, which they could do, they can recover their legal costs that they had to pay lawyers for to take you to court. Now, the first ticket under this bill has already been issued to a woman who was protesting outside of the Burlington Fearman's Pork Slaughterhouse just last week. And she was given a ticket for allegedly walking across a crosswalk when she had the right to do so when a slaughter truck was trying to turn into the intersection. So, again, that's incredibly disturbing that we're already seeing enforcement action of this provision. Now, who's pushing these laws, you might wonder? The answer to that is that it's the farming industry, and they know that the writing is on the wall because people are becoming more and more sensitive to these issues. They're learning the truth, and they may stop eating meat or reduce their consumption as a result, or push for welfare reforms. And I want to highlight just one of the organizations that's been involved in heavily pushing this law in Ontario, with, of course, the help of the Ontario government, which is all too eager to pass it. The Ontario Federation of Agriculture testified during committee proceedings for Bill 156, and it claimed it had the audacity to say to politicians that they're not sure if animals can think or feel. So they're questioning whether animals are even sentient. And they say that as animals and humans are built and function differently, it's unfair to automatically attribute the sensations experienced by humans to be the same as those experienced by animals. We simply do not know if animals are capable of reason and cognitive thought. Now, I think that that's pretty outrageous, and so did Dr. Mark Beckhoff, who wrote this article in Psychology Today. He is one of the world's foremost experts in animal sentience and emotions. And of course, he thought it was absurd that they would say this. But this is exactly the organization that the provincial government chose to promote in its news release announcing that the bill had passed in June. They quote Ontario Federation of Agriculture President Keith Currie. So, as I mentioned, it's now an offense to stop trucks, and a person has already been charged under that provision. It is not yet an offense to engage in a false pretense undercover investigation. That provision will come into effect likely later this year, and there are some regulations that will accompany it that are still being drafted. And we'll talk about your opportunity to get involved with those. Now, egg gig laws in the rest of the country are potentially spreading as well. So British Columbia, there's a bill on the order paper there, so it's been introduced but not passed. Bill 227, which would amend trespass statutes and make it an offense to contaminate a farm or a slaughterhouse. The false pretenses provision is not there, so it's less troubling than Alberta and Ontario. But we are hearing that the BC government is consulting with farmers itself to potentially introduce other legislation. Federally, there's been another bill, Bill C-205, introduced by Conservative MP John Barlow, who is that party's agriculture critic. And this bill is using, again, the language of biosecurity risks. So it would prevent entering a building or enclosed place if doing so could expose animals to a disease or toxic substance that could affect or contaminate them. And the penalties, again, are very, very high, $250,000 for an individual or $500,000 for a corporation. So it's using this language of biosecurity, but it's plainly about trying to stop activism in relation to farms. Manitoba is currently consulting on passing some form of farm trespass legislation. If you're in Manitoba and you're watching this, you can take part in that consultation. Visit the Animal Justice website soon to find out how to do so, but they're looking for feedback on potentially designating livestock facilities or trucks as biosecurity areas or animal protection areas. Again, very Orwellian language that would make it difficult for a person to get into those areas. Quebec has struck a group to study this issue as well. We're not currently sure of the status of that effort given the pandemic, but given that other provinces have moved forward, we're fearful that that will happen as well. So, what comes next? Well, Animal Justice believes that egg gag laws are unconstitutional. And in fact, in the States, they have been struck down on this basis. So, we believe, and US courts have ruled as well, that egg gag laws restrict the right to freedom of expression or free speech in the States. And US courts have now struck down egg gag laws in Utah, Idaho, North Carolina, Iowa, and Kansas. And there are other challenges outstanding. It's not just Animal Justice that believes this, but a group of dozens of Canadian law professors and legal experts wrote to the Ontario government to make this claim as well. And this is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It protects our fundamental freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression. And expression here is the key. That means not just that you have the right to say what you want to do, but that you have the right to gather information to disseminate to others, and that people who want to receive that information have rights too. So when you shut off undercover investigations, which are pretty much the only source of information about what happens on farms, that's to the detriment of all of us. Animal Justice intends to challenge egg gag laws in court, and we will keep you posted on our efforts to do so. We believe these bills are unconstitutional and a very significant threat to animals and to advocacy as well. If you want to get involved, I encourage you, if you're in Ontario and you're listening to this, you can participate in Ontario's consultation on creating regulations for this egg gag bill. It's going on right now. Visit our website where we'll soon have information posted about how to do that. Same goes with Manitoba. If you're living in another province that might be considering egg gag laws, or even if that province is not, I still encourage you to get involved and contact your MLA to make sure that they know why these laws are problematic. And of course, you can support us in our legal challenge to Bill 156. Okay, that's all for now, but I really appreciate you tuning in. I hope everybody has a great rest of the Veg Fest. Thanks so much as well to the TVA for this opportunity.